Well, hey there, how you doing? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Nice to see you again. Glad you're here. You know, I want to talk today a little bit about documents, UFO documents, and this idea about disclosure. There's been a lot of information recently about these Wilson Davis leaked memos, if that's what they are. 1961 special national intelligence estimate, things like this. And so people are asking the question, you know, can there be a document or a leaked memo or something like that that would really push disclosure forward and sort of prove to the world that the phenomena is real, and we kind of have this moment where we all realize, you know, it's all real, that we're being visited by extraterrestrials or other intelligent humanoids from wherever they come from. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm not a document expert, so I'm not going to comment one way or another about whether these documents are real or hoaxes. I think there's evidence on both sides, and you have to make your own mind up about that. But I think the idea in general is very interesting, and I really believe that there isn't going to be a smoking gun document leak of the century or anything like that for a very important reason. And it has to do more with the phenomena itself that we've all been interested in studying. The phenomena itself is not a single pointed thing where you can get all the information about it and all of a sudden you know a lot about it and you can share that with the world, and all of a sudden the world knows about that thing. If the UFO phenomena was these, you know, metal craft coming here from another planet, another civilization, kind of like what we see on Star Trek, even the most recent Star Trek series like Discovery, where these other species are out there, like Romulans or Klingons. And, you know, the Federation encounters these other species of humanoids and has to deal with them one way or another, but they're already kind of like us in some ways, right? They've got ships, they're bipedal, they're humanoids like us, they have, you know, feelings, emotions, genders like ours, everything like that. They're already very similar to us. And in that sense, if that was the type of universe we lived in, there could be a disclosure moment because we could realize, you know, in fact, there are Romulans, there are Klingons. You kind of get it. There was even a Star Trek movie about this once where, you know, they know that the humans are experimenting with space flight and the Klingons just show up just for a moment, just so people can see there's another type of, you know, extraterrestrial out there. In that sort of universe, you would have a disclosure moment and there could be leaks of the century. But I don't think that's the type of phenomena we're dealing with here. The phenomena that we're dealing with here is obviously very complex. It strains the limits of our imagination and our intellect. And that's because we live in a universe that has a lot of different types of life in it, lots of types of energy, information, and it's not very simple to compress into one thing. And I think that's the mistake I'm seeing here from a lot of people who think that there could be such a piece of evidence that would tell us everything. There are going to be pieces of evidence, maybe we've already seen some of them, that will move the ball down the field, but the field will keep getting bigger too. And that's the point of it. UFOs obviously sometimes seem like solid objects or defined things that have defined effects on us and trigger our military system to have responses. Just think of someone like Gary Sterling, who we've had on the channel before, the former missile security guard at Minot Air Force Base, who with his buddy in their security alert team truck, they go out to respond to this alarm at one of the missile silos near Velva, North Dakota, and they get burned from this, as Gary described, such an object you could barely, it was so bright, taking off near the silo when they approached, that they could barely look at it. It must have been a defined object in some ways because it gave a radar return, and he said that jets were scrambled to chase this object, and they could see the jets later going after it as it departed the facility. So when he got back to the control center for this missile group, he said there was all sorts of panic and, alarms are going off. And the next day he's called into Minot Air Force Base to be hypnotized so they can find out more about what he and his buddy actually saw in the truck, which, by the way, was burned. Gary sustained burns, perhaps UV burns. And talking to him even more recently, he's had health effects from this incident to this day, which the VA, by the way, has denied, not surprisingly. So that's one type of encounter where it's really physical, right? You got a military response, you got a certain date. It's part of this wave of northern tier sightings of UFOs over missile facilities, nuclear facilities, and so forth. That is a type of physical phenomena. I mean, as close as it gets to so many other UFO sightings over the years, where it seemed to be like a structured craft with the radar returns. We saw a lot of these types of cases at the citizen hearing. Remember the Peruvian pilot who had that dogfight with this UFO in the 1980s. And again, there was documentation from the Defense Intelligence Agency that this encounter had happened. So there are physical encounters, there are dogfights, but so many UFO sightings seem to be along this continuum from totally solid objects to more amorphous objects. I remember the object I saw in the Everglades in the late 70s with my mom when I was a teenager. That object looked kind of amorphous, kind of gaseous, but it had a defined pattern of dots in it that looked exactly like a Z, like the letter Z. I thought it was a flying Z in the sky. Then it kind of moved into a cloud, disappeared. Now, there was another case I talked about in my book, Black Swan Ghosts. We talked about Peter Leather, the jockey over in the UK, that had told us this story many times with our crop circle groups of him encountering with a buddy one night in Surrey, UK, in the southwest there, walking 1 a.m. over the downs there, and he seen a light flashing come down, land nearby, and a door opens and a being gets out, a tall 6-foot being in a skin-tight suit, with a red light in its right hand, walking towards them. And anyway, Peter's buddy panics. The being turns around. The ship takes off again, gets back in. Then Peter gets a call about it the next day at his place of work. And then a letter shows up the day after that inviting him to a UFO meeting, and he goes to the meeting, and it's these guys just want to hear about his story in the basement of a pub, 20 guys in sort of military uniform that he can't distinguish the insignia, the organization they're from. He says they look like they're from the UN or something. It's represented by all nationalities. But anyway, that is a solid case. Some being gets out, walks towards him. There's evidence in the grass. That's what they were really interested in, the group that wanted to talk to him. That's another case of a very physical type of UFO. But then there's other types of cases. Another witness I mentioned in Black Swan Ghosts was a woman named Joy French, who, she's going up, I believe it's Mount Adams with a buddy. Well, they agree to meet and watch a video, and the next thing she remembers is they're driving up Mount Adams, and he's driving the car, which was strange because she didn't let other people drive her cars. And she remembers a light coming down on the vehicle. It stalls, and her buddy gets out to look at the engine, says there's nothing wrong, and he gets back in the car, and the next thing she remembers, she's back in her bed. He's back in his place, which is a couple miles away. They don't know how they got there, and they confer later on. They had missing time. They both remember the exact same details, but they can't explain it. That's another type of encounter where strange lights happen, radio goes out, car stalls, missing time, no one knows what happened. What kind of encounter is that? We don't see a physical ship. There's this light coming down. So that's another type of UFO encounter experience. It's a little less on the physical side and more on, the missing time, hard to define type of experience. Now, there's other types of encounters of witnesses that I've talked to, which also seem really to go toward the farther end of strange. There is a woman I've interviewed who I haven't released the interview yet. I didn't write about it in Black Swan Ghosts because I learned about it later. And she told me that as a kid, she remembers playing with a bunch of other kids somewhere in the South. A disc landed at the corner of the lawn, and all of a sudden she saw time freeze. Her friends were kind of frozen in motion, and these beings got out of the craft, not all the same species, different types of beings, and she walked over to them and had a conversation with them. And she actually asked if she could go with them, and they said, no, you're too small. And then they kind of left, and she goes back, and all her friends come back to action again. It's like time stopped for a moment. So it's another type of encounter. It still involves a physical craft, but space and time seems to have frozen. In so many cases, if you do your research over the years, we have physical effects, cars stalling, radios stopped working, and this leads us into other type of phenomena like crop circles, like I'm familiar with, where we've seen batteries and cameras stop working, all sorts of electronic devices go haywire for a variety of reasons. We also know that that sort of phenomena happens around something we've been talking about in this channel recently, exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters, what's been commonly referred to as ball lightning. But it's a lot more than just a kind of a ball of lightning. It's actually appears to be, based on the research from Kenneth Shoulders, Hal Puthoff, and others, a type of quantum object that affects the permittivity of space-time. Actually, the speed of light is different for this object than for you and me in our frame of reference here, because these objects actually tap into the quantum vacuum, and that's where they're pulling energy from, not from the classical space around us. But they actually have effects on the electromagnetic spectrum. So this gets into the whole range of UFOs affecting cameras, batteries, electronics, things going on the fritz. But that's also true of some Bigfoot sightings where people have reported their cars stalling around Bigfoot and other strange effects on their electronics occasionally. And then there's Bigfoot UFO sightings, and you can kind of see we've got this continuum, because once we're talking about Bigfoot, I mean, is it a physical flesh and blood creature? Why does the Bigfoot seem to appear around UFO sightings, extraterrestrial sightings? And then why do some Bigfoot sightings, does Bigfoot seem to be able to sort of disappear from being there into, other people don't see it even in a populated area, that tracks disappear. Then we get into the realm of other so-called paranormal phenomena, spirits and ghosts and fairies and kind of hybrid creatures in between cryptid animals. So the point I'm trying to make to you is all of these phenomena, to me, and you don't have to agree with this, but to me it seems like there's a continuum. Now, I know your intellect wants to see UFOs as these things, and, we've got the TTSA group that sometimes talks about it as being a threat. They're from somewhere else and they're going to eat you, whatever. This is a very complex range of phenomena here, and I don't think any one single document ever could possibly explain it all or make it all seem real overnight. I'm not trying to be pessimistic. It's just based on the way science works. It's based on something called the Heisenberg Uncertainty Principle. As you're probably aware, quantum mechanics is this long-standing research tradition in physics that has been proved correct from just every experiment that's ever been done on it, about double slit and particle entanglement and so forth. All the experiments that we know that could confirm quantum mechanics do confirm quantum mechanics. And one of the fundamental principles in quantum mechanics is the Heisenberg Uncertainty Principle. And this is the idea that you can never have total information about anything because it's a quantum process, which means it's in action and you're seeing it in static little shots. Heisenberg uncertainty says you can never know the position of a subatomic particle and its speed, or momentum more accurately, but its speed at the same time. You can know speed, you can know position, but you can't know both, because if you know more about the speed, how fast it's going, then you don't know exactly where it is. If you know where it is, you have to sort of stop the process, and now it's no longer moving. These are known in physics as conjugate variables. The more you know about one thing, the less you know about the other. And I think you can all relate to this. This is kind of like in baking. The order in which you put the ingredients in something actually matters, right? Let's take example of tea, right? If you add milk to your tea that's brewing, that's different than putting your tea bag in cold milk and then adding hot water. It's not the same thing. It's not commutative. And that's what conjugate variables are, is the order seems to matter. And because we live in a universe full of conjugate variables, it means if you find out more about one aspect of something, you're going to know less about the rest of it. And that's my attitude towards documents and what seems to be people's quest for definitive knowledge about exactly what these objects are, where they're coming from. If these are quantum processes, like they must be because our universe is based on quantum mechanics. Now, from my point of view, that has to do with multidimensional processes, Everettian, many worlds processes, but you don't have to agree with me on that. As long as we agree that quantum mechanics is the basis for our reality here about how energy and matter fit together, then we're going to have uncertainty. And the more you know about one aspect of something, the less you're going to know about the other aspects. So what that means is the more definitiveness we want to know about exactly what these UFOs are. And I think we can see that a lot, sometimes coming from the TTSA group, because, you know, on one of the shows, season 1 of it, Unidentified, we saw them sitting down with Italian military folk, and they were talking about these threats. You know, the Italian military were saying that this UFO had shot down the helicopter and the whole thing. I mean, that's really definitive. And part of us, you know, it's like, we know what's going on. They're bad guys. You know, they're trying to get us. So we can classify them as a threat and we can activate that whole threat system. But let's say that's just a little snapshot and you were wrong and it really didn't shoot the helicopter down. Then it's a whole different sort of process. My point here is my intellect and yours often like to simplify things. I learned a lot about this from teaching remote resonant viewing, is that the less certainty your mind has, sometimes you do a lot better job at what you're doing. That's what remote viewing really teaches us. Something I've been involved with for a long time. Something I teach. I welcome you to take one of my online classes now. When we do them next time, I've been doing them in the past couple classes have been totally online. But what that teaches us is that the more uncertainty you're willing to endure for a few minutes, 10, 15, 20 minutes while you're doing your session, the more reward you get, because you really don't know what's going on until you get your feedback picture. And so what we've learned from this uncertainty process is uncertainty can be really valuable, and suspending judgment, suspending conclusions, and suspending prejudice about what's going on in a situation until you have all the information in a remote viewing session when you actually get your feedback. If you can do that for a while, you're going to learn a lot and you're going to grow a lot more than thinking you know what's going on. So I'm all in favor of the disclosure process. Obviously, there are going to be documents that are going to be released. As I've told you in other videos, I've spoken to people that have actually handled crashed UFO material for allegedly government agencies that wanted to figure out how they worked because it was way too advanced for anyone in the government to figure out. As we know from these special access programs, they can't really talk to anybody, so there's very limited skill sometimes within those groups if they come to a problem that's beyond their technological or scientific know-how. And so they shop these pieces around occasionally. I know this is true. I've spoken to these people. There's no doubt about it. But even if you're talking about pieces of things, that doesn't tell us enough about the process behind it. And perhaps we can't figure out how these pieces work because the processes that are involved are, again, quantum. So we really can't see the whole thing. That's what's actually going on. At least that's my perspective on it. Now, I'm curious to hear what you think. You might not agree with this. I'm open to that too. But that's my point of view on it. That's what I'm thinking at the moment. So I'm happy to hear your comments below. Remember to like and subscribe. I'm always curious to hear what you have to think about this. Do you agree, disagree? That's what I have to say at the moment. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again later. Take care for now, and bye.